The talk tonight is on Zen and its the relation to death and the after-death experiences. And of course, the first thing we should get off with is the idea of what is Zen. I think there's a lot of misunderstandings about what Zen really was, and you get to digging into some of the old the writings of some of the old masters, the books that they left behind. You find an entirely different picture in what you get today from some of the assembly line productions that we run into in some of our American Zen centers. I don't think it was ever intended to be something with a formula that you could get out of a book, and you have these ring little bells or practice koans. I think there's been a lot of emphasis put upon setting something up that is easy and yet impossible. The koan is something that anybody can get a koan and play with it for years, and in that respect it's impossible to find a solution to it, and unless the solution is say, well, I'm through with it, it's just nonsense, and then the master says, you're right, now you've got it, see. Or one book says, it punched the master in the nose, and he said, you're right. And when you get punched the second time, so you can probably get enlightenment that way. First, I want to step over into this business of death. Part of the topic tonight is death, and I wonder if we understand death. I wonder if we all have the same conception of what death is. I think some people believe that there's nothing but a cellular death. I think this is the materialistic medical viewpoint, that that's all there is, and it's also the materialistic psychological definition. That when the cell dies, you're dead, that's all. 3 flat readings on EEG. Is there an existence beyond this? This is the big question that every entity, human or animal, wants to know. Even the animals are afraid of dying because they seem to think or show by their actions that it's not good. What's happening to them when you kill them is not good, so they must be a little apprehensive about it. Yet we have a lot of either folklore or literature that signifies that something does happen to us after death. Now, what are the systems of finding this? It's when you read the literature of Zen, you'll find very little mention of the word death. In fact, I don't think there's too much mention of it in the book, except in the evaluations of movements. That most movements are aimed at, by that I mean religious movements and esoteric sects and that sort of thing. They're aimed at taking you someplace after you die. I remember I was initiated into a yogi group one time. Some of you have heard of Kirpal Singh. Well, this was the group from which Kirpal Singh was a schismatic. Also, Ekankar was a schismatic from the same group, and there was a Radhaswami sect in India, in the Punjab, come from the Punjab area of India, the Kashmir section. Basically, the belief of these people was that they called it darshan. You concentrated here on the picture of your guru. And they also had another thing called shab, which there was a Kriya Yoga prior to that. Kriya Yoga was a concentration just upon the third eye, so to speak. But the darshan was now putting the guru in the third eye. Besides that, you listened to the sound current in the right ear. The right ear is where the right music came, and the left ear you had to be careful. So what was it all aimed at? It was aimed at immortality. That you established by that darshan with the guru, you established like a silver cord, and when he died, he went ahead and prepared a place for you, and you kept in touch with him with this sound current and this, cord, what I call the guru chain. A lot of the sects in India, they don't come out and say this. They're tied together by a guru chain, the same as a person in some instances is tied to a lot of their relatives, and they look for their relatives after death. And a lot of people, when they're dying, will call out to their relatives, and no matter how old they are, incidentally, I've seen them call for their mother. And some will they'll see both their parents, or I know one case where they saw both of them. So Zen is basically, it doesn't start out to get into the business of death, whereas many other movements do. And this was just one method of immortality, so that after death there was a tremendous sea of oblivion out there, and you had to take some drastic measure to build some astral chord or some sound or something by which you would be identified so that you could find each other in this vast ocean. The accent was really put on what I consider the basic fear, whereas Zen doesn't take into account the fear. And we'll get into that later, I hope, when we realize that true Zen or true Zen thinking discounts fear, has to do away with fear, because that's a thought deterrent. In other words, you have to rid yourself of it before you can find any real truth. So whenever you're engaged in a religious movement in which the fear of death is the cause of your search, you have to give that up, because it's going to color your thinking. Most of the writings of conversations with Zen masters, the subject of death wasn't discovered. Now, how do we bring about a rationalization then that Zen does something for the after-death experience? It does in the regard that if you find out the answer, then the after-death experience is part of the answer, that's all. But Zen is basically self-definition, because with the knowledge of the self, you also will understand the origin and the limits of the self, the destiny, that is, of the self. Now, you say, how do you know? Well, because the testimony of anyone that has reached this point in Zen, their testimony indicates that they know the score, and their worries are over as far as what's going to happen to them. Their manner of talking about it might be a little confusing, because the simple fact they're talking about an absolute dimension now. See, we look at heaven as a relative dimension. And everybody, when they talk about life after death, they conceive a relative heaven. And they know that the relative experience that they're embodied in is going to perish. And all relative modes of communication are going to fail. We don't get any communication from the millions and millions of people that have passed on. And in fact, there's been so little communication that they considered valid that the scientific world just discounted it all and said there is none. There absolutely is none. It's all wishful thinking created by the desire. So what's the difference? If we're finding out, there's different ways that people go about finding the answer. I think everybody wants to know the truth. And I mean, whether a man goes to church or whether if he's a gangster or he works in a steel mill or he's a farmer or what he is, he's motivated by a desire to know the truth. And regardless of where you meet him, in a beer joint or a battlefield, you'll hear him asking the other fellows questions. What do you think is going to happen to us? What do you think happens after you die? Maybe that's the only comment they'll make, and they'll go back to drinking their beer, but everybody wants to know what's going to happen. The majority of people don't believe it's possible to know. And they're encouraged in this this is part of our cultural tradition to hand to the children, this idea that it's not for you to know. So it becomes an easy rationale when the struggling to know becomes arduous. They say, well, we're not supposed to know. And like in Christian theology, one of the outstanding pillars of Christian theology was Thomas Aquinas. And he said the finite mind will never perceive the infinite. Well, when you think that over, you get an idea. Well, maybe he's right. And we're very limited. We're very microscopic in relation to the planet, in relation to the galaxies, and now out there someplace behind all this is a God, and we're very finite. What hope do we have? What ego do we have that would inspire us to claim immortality, or that creator, engineer, whoever made this whole scene considers us important enough to bestow on us some eternal form of life. We go back again to the ability of these systems defined for us. I'm more or less technically running through my own life experiences for you, because everyone goes to church, and sooner or later most people get disillusioned. It becomes a social institution. They accept it as that. And the theological part of most of your religions and isms somehow does not answer. And most of us just give up. I've got a little system in the province of religious philosophy, or that is religion or religious philosophy, how you can check the different movements for their ability to successfully answer the questions of man. Meaning, if they can answer the questions, it means it must have done some successful research. They must know something before they started preaching. And of course, now the reason I'm doing this, I'm not doing this to rap somebody else, because everything is in its proper place. If every religion is necessary, it wouldn't be there. I'm not rapping that. I'm just presuming that there's a percentage of people that are always interested in maybe one other step. And for the people on certain steps, I hold all respect, and that step is necessary and it's there. Let's evaluate a little bit. What do the different religions do for us? What do we want? In this business of answering questions, we want to know who we are. I call it the nature of man. We want to know life before, some sort of definition on life before birth. There's some people everyone's talking about life after death, but what about before we were born? If we consider ourselves a highly complex organism, the engineering in our bodies is very, very complex, and it seems like a tremendous lot of intricate purpose there, and it just started 60 years ago, or 50 years ago, or 40 years ago. It just started out of nothing. The mentality was just created out of nothing, or just popped, Two chemicals come together, a sperm and an ovum created a unique sentient being. And we overlook it because, it's easy. We're here. Why worry about it? But in the process of looking at our definition, we're going to have to take that into account. We're going to have to be concerned with that end of the string. What were we before? Nothing starts from nothing. Life after death is the other one. The fourth one is the relation of man to nature and the visible universe. Now this permeates all religions. What is our relation to each other? What is the relation to the planet, the soil, the animal kingdom? Why are we stuck in this aquarium, so to speak? Now the fifth is the relation of man to the absolute. This is where the theologian comes along and says, you're here to please God, or God's here to please you. Okay? The universe was created to make you happy. Okay? Basically, the whole problem of theology boils down to three major points. Who are you? Where did you come from? Where are you going? Now, check them out. Go back through your religions, your isms. And by isms, I mean any esoteric movement that pretends to do something. And this is what I do in the book, incidentally. I went through some of them rather carefully and said, here's what we're doing. For instance, you get people will subscribe to a certain cult, and I've talked to them after being in it 40 years. And I said, well, what's this supposed to do for you? And this one lady said, well, I was supposed to meet my astral master while living in this body. That's a long shot, because she presumed when she met him, he'd tell her the score. 40 years to get to talk to a ghost is a long shot, because you're going to lose the best years of your life for research, and you're not concentrating on the problem at hand. The problem at hand is not to meet a spirit, it's to find out who you are. Now, of course, presuming the spirit knows everything, then, of course, you can find out who you are. He'll tell you who you are, perhaps. The amazing, I've known two people who are into this. I'm not going to name it because I'm not here to tear things apart. But finally, she said, this fellow appeared at the foot of her bed. And she asked him a question. He shook his head no and left. That was the end of it. So what I'm getting at is that some movements, and this is a very powerful movement today, the one I just mentioned, I spoke about, very powerful movement, have tremendous membership. And when you run down through the list, do they give us anything on the nature of man? Oh yeah, they've got a concept structure. He's an aura, or he's got this chakra. That's a concept structure. Proven. We want proof, not just what somebody dreams up, or somebody says somebody else said, which somebody else said. See? And on the item of life after death, it depends entirely on whether you're able to make this contact with this astral master before you die. Otherwise, back to the drawing board. The life before birth, of course, the concept that generally goes with these is that you were reincarnated. No proof, just everybody believes if you join that group that you were reincarnated. Relation of man to nature, there's no mention of it. There's very little mention of it. And relation of man to the absolute, there's no mention of the word absolute. Okay. Now, there's another method of finding out who you are. Outside of religion or esoteric religion or philosophy. And that's psychology. And the purpose of psychology is to find out our thinking processes. And this is hitting pretty close to who you are. You know who's thinking. You know what the mind is. Now, I'm not saying that modern psychology will teach that which the mind is. In other words, that's supposed to be their direction. And the nature of man, consequently, becomes the province of psychology. Because it's not biology, shouldn't be the body. It's the nature of man. They're called behavior patterns, if you wish. But regardless, it's his nature, which is the same thing that the religion is after. The nature of mental attributes as well. In other words, he has certain little peculiarities. Anger, affection, emotion, hate, whatever. ESP. And there's an attempt to get into those. Now, again, we get into all these movements. You go back to any of these movements mentioned or any of them that you know of, we get definitions. Sure, you say, sure, we got definitions. Like I said one time I started to give a lecture, and I said, people do not know who they are. And the guy said, nonsense. I know who I am. I said, okay, who are you? He said, I'm the guy sitting in front of you. Of course, that was a little bit of sophistry, it was a joke. But still, I don't say that man knew who he was. But he had never bothered to think. He just accepted the common human projection of what people are. In himself, he did not know who he was. Because the reason we don't know who we are is we get surprises. You think you're one thing, and your wife will prove to you you're something else. You get married or something like that, or have a traumatic experience. You'll say, "Geez, am I like that? Is that who I am?" We have a certain fixed idea of ourselves until the society changes us. Proves to us that we've been casting a projection that people just don't accept. So then we realize we must be somebody else. But a tremendous lot of these definitions, you examine them, and you say, no one knows who God is. And somebody will say, oh, yes. Not going to tell me that. Oh, yes, I know. I'm on friendly terms with him. But there's a difference between a definition and an explanation. And there's a difference between what you know and what you like to believe. We're getting down now to facts. And I maintain that Zen is a factual thing. That's the reason not too much is said. There's a lot of seeming nonsense in the writings about Zen. You will not hear a logical build-up. If this is this, therefore something else can be added to it, and pretty soon we come out with a proof. The proof is an experience in Zen. If you examine a tremendous lot of the attempts, both in psychology and religion, we find that they're what I call concept structures. This is like the old phlogiston theory in chemistry. That before they knew about oxidation, they knew something was going on. So they said, something's going on, and we found this element. It's called phlogiston, and it's causing all the trouble. And for maybe, how long? 50 years, or maybe longer. And all the chemists in Europe accepted the concept structure about oxidation, which was later proved to be oxidation. They accepted it as phlogiston. So this is what we get into in a tremendous lot of the lines of thinking, especially in abstract lines of thinking like philosophy, is that instead of going in and finding out for ourselves, we build a concept structure. We build a rock candy mountain for ourselves. We build a paradise to suit our wishes. We do not look for that which is. If we run into something that says, hey, after death it might be oblivion, the reaction is, I don't want to hear that. And I've heard people say, I don't want to hear that. It's like many of the systems imply that a man is a robot. And I've heard people say, I don't want to hear that. I am no robot. How do you know you're not a robot? You control your actions? When we get into this business, regardless, if we follow the thing from a spiritual viewpoint, following some, let's say, either religious or esoteric movement. And we follow this business of checking things and checking for the human weakness in the experiment. It's like the margin of error, like in a chemical analysis, or the margin of friction in a physical in a physics experiment. We immediately have to qualify the results or the belief or faith that is produced out of that type of thing, unless we're able to set up a whole set of machinery to check ourselves for fatigue, wishful thinking, appetites, wrap them all in. If you like to hunt, then there'll be a happy hunting ground. Okay? And then out of this comes a philosophy or a religion. To be a good spiritual seeker, you have to be, whether you want to or not, you have to be a psychologist. You have to be a self-psychologist, a self-analyst, to watch yourself so that you don't conceive something, create something, rather than explore and find. And to be a good psychologist, you have to be intuitive, because it's not all logic. So there's a sort of combination that we can't separate from. The basis of our religion is largely intuitive. The base of our psychology has to be likewise intuitive. The basis of our religion has to be psychological. It has to start with a self, because any external pursuit of an abstract nature is going to be approached not with our body but with our mind. And unless you know something of that mind, the mind will play tricks on you. And everyone here knows that your mind plays tricks. Well, when we get into psychology, of course, that was one reason when I first went to college, I decided I would look into it. I thought that I started off majoring in chemistry, and I thought I'd become a biochemist and analyze matter and find that little kernel inside there, that would be the life force or the secret of life. And I gave it up because I realized it was I would get into tangential sciences ad infinitum. I would never be able to complete in one lifetime or in many lifetimes a successful analysis of protoplasm for the discovery of what causes protoplasm to live. So I got over into psychology, and I got immediately into behavioristic. It was what was being taught at the time, behavioristic psychology. And I found out that it wasn't investigative. Modern psychology is taught in universities and schools today. It's not investigative. In some places it might be. I'm not saying it isn't. It's some pioneering being done, but it's basically a sort of struggle to find ways and means of predicting behavior so that the people can be controlled or kept happy. In other words, when you go to a psychiatrist, what's he try to do? Does he say, here, let's sit down and discover the truth together, and then we'll know why all this nonsense is going on in your life? Maybe bad karma or something. I'm saying that with tongue-in-cheek. I don't presume that we're afflicted with bad karma, but Lord knows there might be 100 reasons for things happening to us that the psychiatrist doesn't bother to get into. In fact, he's inhibited. He's inhibited from getting into a lot of the moral aspects of our nature, things that we do in moral content that might affect our thinking. Like the doctor. The psychiatrist is a doctor, of course, and they're supposed to put patches on it, not get into morality. So how can you heal some things, perhaps, unless you get into some of the habits that people do? In other words, if a guy's burning his liver out with booze, if you weren't allowed to say that the booze is killing you, he'd continue to burn his liver out. And of course, most of them do anyhow. Now, there are other things that will afflict you, and the idea is basically it's gotten back to patch the character up and put him back into the harness. This is social compatibility. If he can't get along with his wife, well, I could tell you some of the results of people who went to psychiatrists that were having trouble with their wives. One psychiatrist up in Cleveland, Ohio, told the fellow to go to the swingers club and see if he couldn't find a couple other women, try them. So it doesn't matter what you do in their book, as long as you go back and start paying taxes again so that you can be able to afford the psychiatric fee also. That helps. See? But you're no good to anyone if you're down and you're in the dumps and moving around not producing. So the point is not to understand the human mind, but to find what little twists and torts and gimmicks are necessary to get that guy back in harness into social compatibility. So consequently, everything that comes under the banner of psychology is not necessarily designed for the understanding of the mind. I know they're working on that, but they're working on more or less reflexes, like Pavlov's dogs. Let's find some way of predicting, some way that we can get these people to do what we want them to do. And of course, P.F. Skinner is an outstanding example of this. He presumes that someone should program the whole human race. And that'll keep them all out of trouble. We must avoid seizing a postulation that comes easy and putting it out of scientifically discovered truth. This is what we run into a lot in psychology as well. And of course, we also come into this concept that the mind is somatic, meaning there's no mind except what is seen in the body. This is the current theme. Well, for instance, there are a lot of phenomena occur that evidently seem to come from outside the body. And you can write them off as being hallucinations. We had a case in the movie not too long ago with the very valid, that was The Exorcist, case The Exorcist, a little 14-year-old boy right here in this area, and where it started from. I had the clippings in 1949 when it first happened. I had a friend here in D.C. sent me the clippings. This fellow was never treated. This boy was an extreme need of psychiatric care, but he was never treated by a psychiatrist. Well, the diagnosis would have been schizophrenia. And what do you do for a schizophrenic? Maybe pump him full of pills to a point where he can't jerk if he's being inhabited. See? But the prediction was made by, let's say, laymen, psychiatric laymen, and he was cured by them. See? And the prediction was based upon a possible external invasion of a mentality, a complete mentality invading that person's body. Okay? Now, incidentally, these are case histories of this down through history. They're trying in the last 20, 30 years to laugh them off because they don't have them in the textbook. So for the last 10,000 years, as long as there's been records of possession, and records of curing it. Osterreich puts out a good book on this, and I just got my hands on it recently, and they tell the different cases of possession and the cures of them down through the ages. It's not limited to just one class of people. Unfortunately, I'm afraid that there's another thing that's invading all our thinking, and we have to be careful of this. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is if you want to get down to scientific thinking about your self-definition, you got to be prepared for these things that have been enforced upon humanity, and know that they're going to get in your road. You don't have to step around them. So we have a disease called democracy that permeates all of our thinking. That people were able to vote on stuff. The normal curve. Sanity is that which the most people are. And the way it's going, 52% of us will soon be murderers. And then you won't dare oppose them. Or anything that 52% are. See? And there's no such thing as anything being good in itself. Everything is defined as that which the most people are. That is sanity. In regards to this, of course, we have this idea also that people have decided. You say, people have decided that God is dead. It's possible that we don't get as much action as we read about. We read books where God was very active, and he appeared to one fellow in a burning bush, and he sent a legion of angels down to intercede with Gideon, and then right away, that was in the Old Testament, then right away he disappeared. He had a son was being lynched, and he didn't send one angel. He left him lynching. You could take this type of argument and run it down and say, well, there is no God, basically, this is all fiction. Actually, what it amounts to is that people are drifting. They're drifting away. And if 99% of the population maintained a belief that God did not exist, that would not mean that God did not exist. Now, I'm saying his stock market would be weak, because somehow there's a relation between the architect and his creations. Okay? So his influence might be rather weak, but that would not mean that you can vote and decide. Now, in psychology, we're getting into the same thing. We're getting into all the human attributes. What is normal, what the majority of people want to believe is normal, or what you can educate. Another thing that's going on is education. It's like, for instance, I hear a lot about the Panama Canal. One of the politicians got up and says, well, the trouble is we haven't had time to educate the public. Do we want the truth or do we want to be educated? See? I'm not saying one way or the other, which is right. But the thing is that there's a tendency in people in control, whether they're in control of universities or governments, to educate. Not for the truth, but for the convenience of the moment, thinking that they're prophets of the zeitgeist. And by their manipulation of the public mind, they'll bring people around to the right direction. So that as a result of this, we've taken a vote on what the human mind consists of. Now, I think that this is the reason. This confusion about the actual attributes of the human mind is the reason that there are less and less people able to understand themselves. I got a cup of coffee this morning, and I heard some people arguing about what was wrong with the president and the ex-president. And one was a crook, and the other was now a crook also. And one man was black, and the other man was white. And they were arguing that point also. You know, one was being deprived, and he was hoping for a system in which he wouldn't be deprived. And the thought kept going through my head, these people are missing the point. The real point is that the young people of today have no hope. We have hypnosis, but no hope. I'm gone, but I mean the young people. They know it. They're more intuitive than the older people. A baby has a better mind than a 30-year-old man. And a 5-year-old kid has a better mind than a 10-year-old kid. This is not fiction. But as a child grows up, they see the picture. They know they're thrown into a certain pattern. They evaluate it. And the reason there's no hope is not because of the bus is taking the kids to school or not taking the kids to school. It's because the society has become like a den of snakes in which there's no way to untangle and find yourself a way to either become prosperous, if that's all you wish, just a material life or a spiritual life. Everything has to be chartered to the state, like I said a minute ago. Can you come together and think about Zen or talk about Zen or anything? Unless you're chartered, unless you sign a paper that you are now an organization. You're an entity which can be attacked. See? And whether it's just a result of sardine can living, I don't know. Whether we're just getting too populous or what. But the thing is that something, whether it's the manifest crookedness, the manifest controlling of all phases of the individual's life, the flow of power in which people are caught up, and some get by without getting caught, and others get caught and ground up into pieces, that it just discourages anyone from trying to get ahead. That's all. This is the difficulty. And I believe that if the young people, I'm talking about children that are 10 years of age, are able to see this. Every kid knows that the cop on the corner is crooked. Everyone that can read a paper knows that the judge is crooked. Everyone knows that politicians are crooked. How can this kid come up with a belief that he can hold his head up and live according to Pollyanna as he's expected to? He doesn't know which way to turn. I'll give you an example of today's paper. They were finding some chicken growers. It was $20-some million they were going to give back to the people for fixing the prices of chickens. They were trying to hold the price up against the public. It was in today's paper. On the same page, the opposite page, is a notice where the government is telling Pan Am's wanting to drop their prices, and the head of CAB says they can go to hell. They're going to stop them from dropping their prices. Here's one fellow that they're going to put in jail for raising his prices. And then they're shouting about inflation. They're shouting about inflation. So this guy says, okay, let's drop our prices so people would travel more cheaply, which might cause a chain reaction. And maybe a lot of competition would set in. A lot of things would get cheaper. See? So how does a child look at this when he reads that in a paper? He's not going to go in the chicken business, that's for sure. But this is what, then who do we trust? We have to trust our adults. We have to trust our teachers. We have to trust our parents. And our parents have been reduced to dish rags. Frustration has just reduced most people to dish rags, or just giving up, say there's nothing there. I was talking right before this started to Mrs. Marsh here, and about a boy, and I saw his death was approaching him, and I told his father was a doctor, and I said, your son's going to die. It was strictly an intuitional hunch. He was in perfect health. And of course they looked at me like I was a nut, and I felt like a nut for telling them. But I told them anyhow out of compulsion. He was dead within 2 weeks. The tractor trailer ran over him. He was smoking pot, and his girlfriend got hurt and staggered out in front of traffic to try to get help for her, and he got run over the tractor trailer. But when I said this to his father, the father's reaction, first of all, was one of indignation that this nut would dare to comment on his son's life, And then what he said was, well, what have they got to look forward to anyhow? See? In other words, there is no, we are animals, basically. If we can't be anything else, we can be good animals and fight for the kids. Try to keep them alive, try to do something for them. So this is basically the thing, that there is nowhere for these people to turn to, in my estimation. So we're in a hopeless, sick condition. Now, and who are the people who are going to pull us out of this? Our psychologists and our psychiatrists, who have the highest suicide rate in the country. Of any profession, they have the highest suicide rate. We talk about direct experience now. We're getting into the field of direct experience, or let's say religious experience. And I find 4 major categories. I believe that the differences in after-death experiences depend upon the differences in pre-death experiences. I don't know if you're acquainted with Gurdjieff or not, but Gurdjieff draws a pretty good lineup of the types of people. He lists 4 major categories below the enlightened level, that is. And the first is the instinctive, the second is the emotional, the third is the logical, and the fourth is the philosophical. Now, I find 4 corresponding states that some medical people call exaltations, or spiritual experiences. And they sort of correspond to these different levels. And the first is salvationism. The second is the Eureka experience, the equivalent of Satori, the wow, I know it now. I know what X means in algebra. See, wow. The third is cosmic consciousness, and the fourth is enlightenment. Now, Sri Ramana Maharshi catalogs them a little different. He calls the last 2, instead of cosmic consciousness, Kevala Samadhi, Kevala Nirvikalpa Samadhi, and Sahaji Nirvikalpa Samadhi. I may not be pronouncing this right, but I can't. I wasn't trained in the Indian dialect. So we go back and we look at the instinctive man. An instinctive man is a man who lives to live, and the biggest part of his life is taken up just in what he can eat, and his sexual experiences, how much he can drink, how much dope he can take, or whatever that is, and then say, and he thinks he's enlightened. I've had people walk up to me and tell me they were enlightened, and I said, what made you enlightened? He said, acid. So, but he thinks that sometimes that he's enlightened by some of these experiences he has. If he's before acid, it was the hoodles. And no man was enlightened until he had the hoodles. You know what the hoodles are? That's where you see snakes and monkeys from drinking. But, when a man gets tired of his instinctive level, he may search around for religion, or he may meet a girl, or the woman may meet a man, and she decides that she's going to church or something, and they decide to forget their body and concentrate on the love of Jesus, or the love of somebody, or some ideological God, some idea of God. And they drop their instinctive self and find a tremendous rapture. And this is, in the Pentecostal faith, it's called salvation. There's a loss of ego. And when any time there's a loss of ego, there's an immediate soaring of the spiritual potential. Because this is what holds us down on the fertilizer level. Now, after we lived so long in the emotional level, and some of you are old enough to have gone through it, where you've fallen in love with a certain religion or idea and finally decide that you're kidding yourself, that this is an emotional trip, that you're really in love with something that you don't even know about. Maybe Jesus wasn't that handsome. He might be ugly, see? So we decide we're going to look into something. Maybe we should use our head now. If we're not too old. A lot of people only get that far. I've known people were 80 years of age and they were right on that salvationistic level yet. They believed they were saved, and That was it. So they start digging. They start digging with their intellect. They attack as well as they can, because there's very little to use your intellect on. Numerology, Kabbalah, astrology, hoping that something will crack the door and a new truth will come in. That maybe there's a way of appraising God through the Kabbalah, or something of that sort. Now, sometimes it might become a fundamentalistic thing, where a person, the Kabbalah is really a new type of fundamentalism, you might say. There's different levels in the Kabbalah. In other words, it's like a numerological Kabbalah and also the spoken and unspoken Kabbalah. But it is an exercise. It's a mental exercise. It begins with that, at least. Well, sometimes we belabor ourselves with this, like Swedenborg. Swedenborg has a system, too, of interpretation of the Bible. And nothing comes of it for a long time, and then another ego drops. We completely drop the emotional ego, and we have a realization that now we've solved it. Now we've found X. See? And for a minute, everything seems in order. We don't know why. We don't have words to express it, but we think everything's in order, and everything will be taken care of. And that's very short. Now, this I like to distinguish between, we're talking about Zen, the difference between Satori and enlightenment. And I'm distinguishing by virtue of the testimony of people who have described these experiences, not that it's defined in a book. For instance, in Kapleau's book, we run into people who supposedly experienced Satori, where it was, wow, I got it. It is not wow when you die. You don't come back after a wow experience, unless for hours, sometimes days. That the shock, the trauma of dying is so great that, and also the trauma of coming from an absolute condition, a mentality, back into relative, a picture show, a stage, which it's not. We're not happy to get back there, and it's trauma. So consequently, there's a tremendous shift has to take place. And I think this is true about a lot of people. If you ever notice you're around a person that thinks they're dying, and they pass out, and they wake up, and one of the first things they do is weep, because of the tremendous emotional upset. Almost they had resigned themselves to dying, and I know one doctor, when he was dying, they brought him to, thumped on his chest and got him back, and he cursed him. Because he said he didn't have any hopes of immortality. He wasn't a religious man. He just said, I've got to do it all over again now. Why don't you leave me alone? So consequently, the same thing applies to a deep spiritual experience. You've got to come back and do it all over again. You've got to come back and get your feet down in the mud again, see? And grub, like you did before. So consequently, what happens after what we've got in this person who takes the logical approach to analyzing things, it is working with a vanity. The logic is vanity. Nothing is ever done by logic in esoteric matters. It's strictly a vanity thing, and where we can pile little words together in little sentences and say, look how clever I am. You can't outwit me. See? Well, we've got a concept structure built that's impregnable. You can't destroy this concept structure. After a while, as again I said, we live long enough, we come to the conclusion that the wow experience is not the final experience. And we go back to the drawing board, and we start plugging away in Lord knows what directions. See? The ego of being logically capable drops. This self-delight in our own thinking processes drops. And we enter a thing which we call cosmic consciousness. And the state above that, of course, in cosmic consciousness, there's still, incidentally, in all three of these first three things, we have what I call relative experience, which is bliss. In some of them, there are figures appear, where they actually think they're inspired, or they see Jesus, or something of that sort, or they have happiness. They're very happy, that they feel refreshed, that they've reached this plateau. In cosmic consciousness, if you want to read about it, there are cases written rather extensively by Richard Buckey in a book called Cosmic Consciousness. You can get it in the library, I imagine, any place. And his is a typical one. His description is very similar to that which John of the Cross had, in which lights appear. The scene is lit up. Buckey was in Montreal, and he said the horizon became rose-colored, and he realized this thing permeated his whole being, and he realized beyond the shadow of a doubt that the world was perfect and that there was nothing wrong with anything that happened in the world. Everything, we were talking earlier about things that are evil and some that are good, and he realized there was nothing evil, everything was good. See? And it carried him serenely to the end of his life. But that's a relative experience. Lights, bliss. See, everybody's. You tell people that there's no bliss in after death experiences. They don't have parts of it, but they're going to die anyhow. See? The facts are facts. We want facts, not the candy store choice. See, we're not in a candy store. We can choose bliss. But a lot of people say, I don't believe that. If you tell me there's no bliss waiting. What, it was like as if we're supposed to, we've had a lot of fun here, and now we're supposed to go up there and get a reward for it. Right? Regardless, the thing that distinguishes the Kevala Samadhi from the Sahaja Samadhi is the fact that there is no bliss, because you're dealing with an absolute condition. Whereas in the cosmic consciousness, you're still dealing with a relative condition. You're wide awake, there's no trauma, in fact it's blissful. Whereas in preceding enlightenment and coming out of enlightenment, the cases that I have looked into, they're very traumatic. It's very painful, because it's death. It's real death. It's not just a vision. They gave quite a few instances of accounts of life after death. Kubler-Ross wrote about this and Moody, but they didn't bother to catalog. A good scientist, when he runs through an experiment, he catalogs a thing a bit. And all of the experiences that we run into in the by reading accounts or by our own personal experience or talking to people, you'll meet people sometimes that said, well, I was pronounced dead and such happened. You'll find they're not all the same. Well, I was in one of the boys' books today, and I found a piece of paper in there, and he was complaining that there was no hope for the researcher into life after death because of the fact that all these people had different stories. So consequently, there's no sense in trying to find out anything. But yet there's a pattern formed, and this is what's missed. And of course, I say it's missed completely by Moody and Kubler-Ross, because they haven't been in it that long. We find that there's a certain definite pattern formed, and we can examine these cases, and you'll get an idea of the pattern. And if you've heard many, if you've been done any reading this line, you'll find that they correspond to this. I've talked to people, incidentally, a very close friend who had a heart attack, was pronounced dead, came back. He came up to me asking me what I thought would happen after death, and I didn't answer him. I said, what happened to you? You were out. He said, nothing. Oblivion. I remembered absolutely nothing. That's the first category, oblivion. The second is what I call earthbound. Now, in this book by Osterreich, you'll find a lot of cases where the possessions are often earthbound. The supposition of the boy from D.C. that was possessed in the Exorcist, Keith the Exorcist, was an ant, supposedly an ant, that bothered him. An ant the boy knew while he was living. She died and came back. That was the whole thing in a nutshell. Or evidently, according to some of the cases, you'll find people wandering around. Some of them are in haunted houses. They hear stories of haunted houses, and they get down and they talk to the spirit, and the spirit says, I can't leave, I got my money's in the cellar. But anyhow, we have the earthbound category of people who don't seem to sense any heaven. They don't talk about being in heaven when you talk to them. They're hanging around, and this seems to be very real and very important to get energy, perhaps from a living person, like in the case of the Exorcist, they were tapping the kid. The third category is people who see scenery only. They'll talk about seeing beautiful vistas and beautiful meadows and fields of flowers, but no people. They'll very rarely talk about seeing people in this category. The fourth category is the ones that see people, only people. When they talk, you don't mention about where they were sitting or where they were standing. And they see mostly relatives. This category is people whose the mother comes, they pick them up, an uncle. If they've been orphans, it's somebody they knew, a next door neighbor, somebody that died and seemed to be looking after them. And the fifth category is people who see celestial beings. They think that they're men from higher levels of spiritual life, angels, if you want to call it that, or gods, saviors, etc. Very rarely do the people who claim to see these angels or these shining men ever claim that they're God. They just say that there was I think Moody brought it out, I'm not sure, it was either him or Kubler-Ross, about the Christians. Invariably, some of the cases we're talking of seeing Jesus. But the people of Jewish faith didn't see Jesus. They saw a spirit, but they just identified it as an angel. And that was the predominance of the cases examined by Moody. He did that much good. Now, the sixth category is people who witness all of humanity. Now, this is peculiar to some people who have what I call the cosmic consciousness experience, in which they will see the whole panorama of life. And the seventh category is where they see nothing and everything. Those two have to be spoken together, nothing and everything. And now, where do we get this evidence that we're talking about? Of course, a lot of it is said is from word of mouth, but a lot of it's from medical records. People who, like, as far back as Paracelsus. Paracelsus is supposed to have been the father of medicine. And he writes books on spirits and incubi and succubi and encounters he had with entities of that sort. And other sources from doing things yourself, like astral projection. Monroe writes a book on astral projection in which he talks of encountering spirits, preferably the lady upstairs. Another method is spiritualism. Now, the spiritualists claim they, by materialization, they contact and produce. And I have seen these, incidentally. I qualify opinion as to what they find. But I was in a room one time where about 18 were materialized. And they were recognizable by people there as being dead relatives. But as I said, I don't want to get into that unless you're interested in it later, but I come to the conclusion they were not relatives. Visions. A lot of holy people, so-called holy people, see visions of previously holy people. See? Now, the last category of the I found on the sources are direct experience. There was a sage in India a while back said there's only one way to find out the secrets of life and death after death, and that is to go there, die, And it's not as difficult as it seems. See? And there was a fellow wrote a book, I forget the name of it, on hashish, experiences with hashish years ago. And I never forget a little quatrain he had in the front of it. He was well known, I've seen his name. But he had put a piece of paper by. He's trying to see what had happened to him after death. So he took nitrous oxide, and he had it fixed so when he passed out, he would fall away from the thing that held the handkerchief over his face. So if he passed out, he'd fall, and then he'd be revived by breathing. And he was by himself. So he put a piece of paper there to write if he could write anything while he was unconscious. About the dynamic findings of this type of experiment. Of course, he fell over and he woke up and he looked on the paper and it said, Higamus, hogamus, man is monogamous. Hogamus, higamus, woman is polygamous, or something. So, but anyhow, he tried, Getting back to the business of psychology or the investigation in this manner of our after-death experiences and a lot of things that are just phenomenal experience, not after-death experience like ESP. I call them possible conclusions because you can believe what you wish. We are not somatic alone. Man is dual. We are two parts. We are material and we are also something else more subtle, whatever it is. We can call it ectoplasm or spirit or smoke. But we're not all material. And a proof of this duality, if this is the end result, if this is the reward at the end of the labor to seek for enlightenment, if we prove this duality, we open the door for immortality because it's manifest. Now, I'm not saying we should accept it, so we'll hope to be immortal. It's evident that we're not going to gather up our bones on Judgment Day, because we'd have to share them with a lot of people. If we're getting scientific about anything, it would be to to reject the idea that someday this molecules are going to be regathered and the memory will come back and the sentience will come back and we'll walk away immortal. Immortality has to lie in duality. It has to lie in consciousness outside the body. Also, the different levels of these different states that people have indicate, as I said before, it's going to bear a parallel. When a person dies, his heaven is different. This is the reason for categorizing. That a person who only goes as far as the instinctive level may not, when he dies, have a greater experience than that. I think this permeates nearly all of the Asian thinking, is that people are not all the same. There is no great democracy in heaven. We're not all, happy cherubs. We all look alike and, got access to the popcorn machine up there or whatever refreshments there are, but we're still different. We're still basically different. And this is the idea of the reason why the belief in reincarnation was encouraged or received, let's say, the life that it did from the minds of the people in India and Asia, was because of that difference. That there was a hope that perhaps you would come back and get into a better rut. That was the idea. There would be no point in reincarnation if everybody was immediately equal and all wise just by dying. I know a lot of people say that. I went to a funeral home with a fellow one time. He looked in the casket and he said, "That man knows everything." I wasn't too sure. I wasn't too sure. He said, "Well, the fellow wasn't talking for one reason." Now, of course, what are the possibilities from the result of this? See, the possibilities besides what we might say are good possibilities, there are some that are lesser possibilities, like the possibility that all human intelligence and life is aimed at oblivion. This is one possibility. We don't know where it's headed. There's a possibility of infinite progression. This seems to be very tiresome. I mean, we have the feeling, when I was reading this case in Österreich, it was about a rabbi who had followed up with these people and he died and they wouldn't talk to him. He was shunned, and so he tried to get into a pig. And he got into the pig a while, somebody killed the pig, and he went to the horse and got the horse and finally got into a girl, and they exercised him. And he got in the girl, but they talked to him. And it was another rabbi who was exercising him, see. And manifestly, he wasn't too happy where he was. It seems if he's going to work his way up, he's starting off with a pig and a horse, he's going to have a tremendous long series of experiences. And if we get into certain Indian philosophy, where brought out by people like Blavatsky, where a person becomes a good Chela and then they become an adept and a master and a bodhisattva and Dayan Koan, and the first thing you know, we run out of categories. They're still going. If there is a single mentality behind it that creates it, it seems like if we knew of it, and of course I get a feeling that's the reason we can't remember who we were before we were born. If we knew how many people we were before we were born or what we were, we're liable to hunt a loaded gun and get it over with, see? Because the knowledge of say, 1 million years of experience, which we're attributed to by some of the people who believe in reincarnation, 1 million years of what, it would get very tiresome. Maybe the end result would be that eventually they'll get hungry for oblivion, just go to sleep. Okay? Well, we deviated maybe. See, seems like that, but because where does Zen fit into this? And of course, I maintain that the experiences that we've had from the people on these different levels who have died and be resuscitated and made little testimonials, we also have the testimonies of people who have received enlightenment, people who have gone the whole trip. And the evidence is that these people know the score. And this involves the knowledge, the total knowledge of yourself and the total knowledge of where you're going to. And of course I say that and immediately I've got to explain it, because there's no such thing as knowledge where you go. But that's the only way we have of expressing it. You are. When you reach there, you are. And of course as soon as you say, what you are, you confuse people. Because the feeling that you have is that you're God. See, beyond a shadow of a doubt, you're God. Of course, the thing that we get into, another thing I want to mention about Zen is the batting averages. Zen has a poor batting average, and I never hide this because most people say, you know, they go to a big cathedral or something, and they say this is the door to it, the truth. Everyone, come here and you'll get the truth. The batting averages of people in Zen go back to something maybe 1 in 10,000 that enter, make application or look into it. Maybe not. Maybe they're a little higher than that, but I know the odds are tremendous. So it's rather discouraging if you get into Zen literature. Now, I maintain, of course, that what happens is that once you get into it, regardless, you may not go the whole trip, but there's one thing about it, you'll be a better psychologist when you get through. No matter, all the way along the line, you're going to be able to look at yourself and understand yourself and develop a tremendous lot more compassion for your fellow man, because you're going to understand why he's doing things. And you understand the fact that he's not doing things. See? So this gives you more compassion for your fellow man. As far as the ability to find reality, regardless of the batting averages, I don't believe that there is another way. There are individual systems. Don't get me wrong. I met a man one time that was he'd never read anything on Zen or anything esoteric, and he'd been raised a devout Christian. I forget, he was Protestant of some sort, some faith, and he was an aviator in Japan, bombing Japan, and he found out he was killing people, and he got to questioning himself, what goes on here, because in the Bible it said God observes the fall of the sparrow. So he said, where's God? Is he, watching this? Is he encouraging this? And somehow he couldn't accept that killing all these people was commensurate with his concept of what a just God was. Of course, we all create God in our own image and likeness. He made that mistake right off the bat, because God, you can't tell what God wants. If there was a person capable of looking at the World War II and making opinions, we wouldn't know. We wouldn't know what a creature of that vast nature would really think about us. But anyhow, it shook him up, and they got him out of the army and sent him home. So he came back to Dallas, Texas, and he couldn't work. He was mumbling to himself, trying to figure out the riddle, and he went back to church, and he somewhere in the Bible it said that if you would get an answer from the Lord by pray thusly, and what followed was the Lord's Prayer. So he took the Lord's Prayer and he studied it, prayed, and studied it, took it apart, cents at a time, concentrated on it. And he said the more he did it, the more trouble he had. His wife left him, his children despised him, they walked off and left. He lost every job he got a hold of, and he finally got a job as a salesman at a car dealer's. In the middle of an interview with some customers, he put his head down on the desk and asked God to kill him. He said he didn't have guts enough to kill himself, but he wanted out. He couldn't stand it any longer. He woke up in the hospital. I ran into him in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. A friend of mine had brought him up to meet some people from Firestone, Goodyear, and those places. They were mostly engineers. And he thought he'd impress these engineers, and they thought he was crazy. But because I had a very similar experience, I knew the man was telling the truth. And I'm watching, and they're watching them make fun of him. They were just sitting there making fun of him, more or less. And he was just telling it casually what happened to him, and I was amazed. And of course, I tried to, I liked to communicate with him, but he didn't stay around long enough, and I lost track of him. His wife was there. His first wife had dumped him, and he's married now to a very beautiful girl, I'd say 20 years younger than he was. Of course, they're looking at her, too. They're thinking, what's this holy man doing with well, he didn't pretend to be holy in the first place. What's this holy man doing with this good-looking girl? he went out to the toilet, and they caught her alone. She was out in the garage, or meeting out there to get away from the kids. And they said, what do you think of your husband? Do you think he's all he's talking about? And she looked him in the face and she said, my husband is my Lord and Savior. And she meant it. She meant every word of it. But to look at him, he looked like Jackie Gleason's sidekick. Crazy Guggenheim, I think they call him. I'm not sure acquainted with him. His face was all, his eyes were hung down over his, their lids hung down. Looked like he was boiled in booze. And I think he had his share when going through these traumas. But regardless, the reason I'm mentioning this was that this was a profound case. This man was in the hospital in an out-of-the-body experience that lasted for a week, in which he traveled through history. He could go any place he wished, and he would recount like battles that occurred. If he'd be in that particular thing, you were there. He'd kind of tune into it, which was a crazy talent in a way. I didn't see much point in it, but nevertheless, he said it's there if you want to look at it. Once you get to that position, you can just tune in on any place in space and time, because we're in a space-time continuum, so to speak. But this man never heard the word Zen. So what I'm getting at is Zen is a good word. It describes a lot, but it's not the only path. But to me, it's the only thing that you get any literature on. You don't get any literature on these individuals like John of the Cross or somebody who's constrained by virtue of the fact that his life's threatened by the local church, or this fellow who doesn't have any money and can't put his words down, and people don't believe him when he talks, that sort of thing. But there are some outstanding cases. Again, when we talk of Zen, we're not talking about all Zen, because I think there's a lot of chicanery in every movement. And I never thought we'd get into Zen, but I think there's a lot of commercialism. And, for instance, the only thing that Zenish about me is the fact that my head is bald, I don't believe you have to dress a certain way. I think it's the way you think, not the way you dress. You don't have to have koans. Life is full of koans. All you have to do is apply the koans of everyday life. You get them by the bundle, like him. This man got koans from the customers coming in the car dealership. See, but we get into children's games with the most important of philosophic or spiritual movements, and we start to play games and devise systems and exalt the history. It's like I had a teacher who was, his name was Polyan, and he said, I'll give you my genealogy if you wish it. It doesn't amount to a damn, because how do I know that my teacher's teacher wasn't phony? How do you know that I'm not phony? The proof is in the pudding if I do some good. See? But a tremendous lot is done what they call the Ankh? Something like that, a stamp, you're supposed to have to make a bona fide teacher. See? A stamp does not make a thinker. Genealogy does not make a man able to transmit. And when Wang Po was giving a talk in China, I don't know when he lived, 1,000 years ago perhaps, he said there was no Zen left in China. They called it Chan in China. There's no Chan in China. He said, why? There's 3,000 people in this monastery, and there's monasteries all over China. He said there's no transmission. Now, Bodhidharma, who was the first Zen teacher to reach China from India, laid down the four signposts of direction to true Zen. And the first one is a separate transmission outside the scriptures. Now, this is very important. A separate transmission outside the scriptures. Zen is a method of mind-to-mind contact. Transmission, that's what it means. The second one is no attention paid to forms, words, or letters. In other words, fundamentalism is out. You can't recite sutras and get any place. This is pastime. That's like saying your rosary beads. It might put you to sleep. It might keep you from doing nasty things, but it will not open your head. See? And the third one is looking into your nature. Again, we're going back to, this is true psychology. True psychology now. Looking into your nature. Understanding yourself. See? And of course, the last one is the attainment of Buddhahood. And if you apply these yardsticks, I've given you a whole lot of yardsticks tonight to work with, but if you apply these yardsticks, to these movements, first of all, there's no price on anything. People have to pay the rent, and if you live with somebody, it's good to share a prorated rent, prorated electric bills, that sort of thing. But when it becomes a business, anything, I don't care what movement it is, whether it's Zen or anything else, get out of it. Because that's all it is. And when people get too busy with the business, that's where their head is also. That's where their head is. So they're not into psychology. They're into finance. And the majority of the what I call the systems of self-definition that we encounter are into pocket expansion, not mind expansion. So you can waste years with them.